So in other videos, we briefly touched on how Macduff decides to flee Scotland and seek help in England for the overthrow of Macbeth. This is where Duncan's eldest son, Malcolm, has fled to. We haven't really talked too much about him, but basically Macbeth put the idea out there that it was Malcolm and his brother who hired Duncan's guards to assassinate him, so the two sons were forced to flee. When Macduff reaches Malcolm and starts begging him to rally troops and come back to Scotland to reclaim the throne, we see that Malcolm is a bit more cautious than his father had been. He suspects that Macduff's coming as a trap to lure him out of hiding so that Macbeth can kill him. So in order to test Macduff, he engages in this funny little back and forth with him in which he basically says, "I can't go back to Scotland, you don't want me as a king." And Macduff goes, "What are you talking about? Of course we do." And Malcolm says, "I can't be king because I'm overcome with insatiable lust, and none of your wives and daughters would be safe. I can't be trusted with the power that the crown would give me." Macduff goes, that's kind of unexpected and unfortunate, but it's not that big of a deal. You're the rightful heir. Come on back." And then Malcolm says, "Well, I'm also super greedy. I'll take everybody's lands and jewels for myself, and nobody wants that. It's better if I stay in exile. Trust me." To which Macduff responds, "Okay, but you're still not as bad as Macbeth. You can't be. Please, come home." Now what Malcolm is doing is testing to see if Macduff is a man of worth or not. If it seems like he just wants to get Malcolm back to Scotland no matter what the cost, then it's clear that he doesn't really care about the welfare of his country, and he's just Macbeth's pawn. So Malcolm takes it a step further. He does away with individual faults and basically paints himself as the worst sinner alive. He says in terms of graces, "I have none. The king becoming graces, as justice, verity, temperance, stableness, bounty, perseverance, mercy, lowliness, devotion, patience, courage, fortitude, I have no relish of them, but abound in the division of each several crime, acting it many ways. Nay, had I power, I should pour the sweet milk of concord into hell, uproar the universal peace, confound all unity on earth." Macduff basically goes after that, "Okay, you've convinced me. You're an awful person. You're not only unfit for the crown, you're unfit to live. And now that I've risked all in coming to you, my future's ruined. What am I going to do?" And after Malcolm sees his grief, he says, "Well, I was basically lying about what I said earlier. I take it all back. It was a test. You passed. Let's saddle up our horses and go kill the tyrant." And at that moment, another Thane arrives and tells Macduff that his wife and his children have all been slaughtered by Macbeth's henchmen. Macduff is obviously crushed, and Malcolm, although he's horrified and feels bad for him, says, "Dispute it like a man." Then this brief dialogue takes place, and I'll go ahead and read it to you in full. Macduff responds to Malcolm's "dispute it like a man" statement by saying, "I shall do so, but I must also feel it as a man. I cannot but remember such things were that were most precious to me. Did heaven look on and would not take their part? Sinful Macduff, they were all struck for thee. Not that I am, not for their own demerits, but for mine, fell slaughter on their souls. Heaven rest them now." And Malcolm says, "Be this the whetstone of your sword. Let grief convert to anger. Blunt not the heart, enrage it." And Macduff says, "Oh, I could play the woman with mine eyes and braggart with my tongue. But, gentle heavens, cut short all intermission. Front to front bring thou this fiend of Scotland and myself. Within my sword's length set him. If he escape, heaven forgive him too." And Malcolm says, "This tune goes manly." The idea of manliness is all over in Macbeth. In fact, people talk so much about what it means to be a man and call other people's manhood into question so often that sometimes it starts to sound like a bunch of professional wrestlers cutting promos in the middle of the ring. Each of the characters, the primary characters anyway, have their own unique idea of what it means to be a man. We'll explore these ideas and then talk about how manhood or manliness shapes the events of the play. Now, Lady Macbeth is the obvious place to start here. We've already talked about how she asks the dark spirits to unsex her and to stop up the passage of remorse. To her, clearly, the idea of being a man means being able to do what needs to be done at all costs. She has little time for womanly fears and also little time for childish fears. She handles things in the play with a no-nonsense, almost puritanical seriousness. When Macbeth runs out to her, after having killed Duncan and the bloody daggers are still in his hands, she tells him to go put them back, and he can't. He's too distressed by what he's just done. Lady Macbeth says, "Infirm of purpose, give me the daggers. The sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. 'Tis the eye of childhood that fears a painted devil." In other words, quit being such a baby. Don't be so infirm of purpose. With that word infirm, a sexual connotation is introduced here. She's questioning Macbeth's manhood in the most literal sense that it can be questioned. And words and expressions throughout the play seem to haunt Macbeth that indicate that he can't get the job done. And Macduff, during that scene we just read where Malcolm is encouraging him to take revenge on Macbeth for his slaughtered family, replies that he can't, because Macbeth has no children. Macbeth, it is heavily implied, is barren. Remember in the previous video how he turned over the idea of Banquo's descendants becoming kings after all the hard work he did to win the throne. He said then that he has a fruitless crown and a barren scepter. Lady Macbeth obviously feels like she needs to wear the pants in the relationship, and Macbeth even says this way back in Act 1. He tells her to bring forth men-children only, for thy undaunted mettle should compose nothing but males. We can see that her idea of manhood is a very strong, rigid, almost unfeeling concept. And strangely enough, the only other woman in the play, aside from the bearded witches, is Lady Macduff, and she has a concept of manhood similar to Lady Macbeth. When she learns that Macbeth's assassins are coming to kill her, she says this, "Whither should I fly? I have done no harm. But I remember now I am in this earthly world, where to do harm is often laudable, to do good, sometime accounted dangerous folly. Why then, alas, do I put up that womanly defense, to say I have done no harm?" It's a womanly defense to say that she hasn't done anything wrong? In the world of men, to her anyway, being innocent is a crime. To do harm is laudable. Both Lady Macbeth and Macduff paint this image in our heads of emotionless killing machines. And there's always been this idea in our culture, from way back before Shakespeare's time, even to the present day, that men are supposed to be strong and unfeeling, almost to a comical extent. This is brought out in children's cartoons. One example being the Disney film Mulan. In that movie, Mulan's elderly father is drafted into the army, and because he's so weak and she knows that he wouldn't last a day in fighting conditions, Mulan disguises herself as a man, sneaks away, and joins the Chinese army. And if you listen to the lyrics of the musical number that the army sings during the little training montage, you hear that to be a man is to be as swift as a coursing river, with all the force of a great typhoon, with all the strength of a raging fire, and as mysterious as the dark side of the moon. No pressure, guys, right? But you could almost imagine in some twisted mashup Lady Macbeth singing this song to her husband to get him to do what needs to be done. Another cartoon that I'm sure everyone's familiar with at this point is SpongeBob SquarePants. I remember there's a scene where his friend Patrick is coaching SpongeBob on how to act grown-up, or how to be a man. He says, "You're a man now, start acting like one. Puff out your chest, now say tax exemption. Now you have to acquire a taste for freeform jazz." These criteria are a bit ridiculous, but the underlying idea is there that men have to be serious and burly. But for the men themselves in Macbeth, it's a different matter. We've already seen that for Macduff and Malcolm, being a man means taking your revenge and getting things done, but it also means feeling grief for those you love. It means being passionate, even if, as in Macduff's case, that passion is sorrow. Being a man is only worth anything at all if you're a passionate man, if you're a man of emotions. Nowadays, the idea isn't as prevalent in popular culture. We're all familiar with the adage, "real men don't cry," which is of course ridiculous, but there have been times throughout history where it was believed that men were actually more sensitive than women. And of course today, writing poetry may seem like a wimpy, overly sensitive thing for a man to do, the sort of thing that would get you pushed into lockers by the football jocks at school. But there was a time when it was believed that only men should write poetry. The 19th century Romantic poet William Wordsworth, in his famous Preface, poses the important question, what is a poet? And then answers the question in the following lines. He says that he is a man speaking to men, a man, it is true, endued with more lively sensibility, more enthusiasm and tenderness, who has a greater knowledge of human nature and a more comprehensive soul than are supposed to be common among mankind. A man pleased with his own passions and volitions, and who rejoices more than other men in the spirit of life that is in him, delighting to contemplate similar volitions and passions as manifested in the goings-on of the universe, and habitually impelled to create them where he does not find them. Now, I really don't think Wordsworth was suggesting here that women can't write poetry. When he uses the word man here, he's using it as an umbrella term for the whole human race. But he doesn't make any effort to point that out either. It's clear that in his own mind, the picture that he's formed of an ideal poet is in fact a man. An example of this sort of philosophy can be found in another one of Shakespeare's plays, Twelfth Night. In that play, we meet the Duke of Illyria, Orsino, who is madly in love with the Lady Olivia. And he's been sending his servants to her house with presents and with love letters, but she's turned them all away. She doesn't really want anything to do with him, but this doesn't deter him, and it just makes him more desperate. Finally, one of his servants poses the question, what if she can't love you? Imagine there's some woman who feels the same way about you as you do about Olivia. You can't make yourself love her, you tell her so. Mustn't she be so answered? And listen to what Orsino says. It's kind of funny because he's sort of a self-pitying, egotistical character, but you can tell that he's serious. He says that there is no woman's sides can bide the beating of so strong a passion as love doth give my heart. No woman's heart so big to hold so much. They lack retention. Alas, their love may be called appetite, no motion of the liver but the palate, that suffer surfeit, cloyment, and revolt. But mine is all as hungry as the sea, and can digest as much. Make no compare between that love a woman can bear me, and that I owe Olivia. In other words, women can't love like men can. They're too shallow. So we've seen that Lady Macbeth's idea about what a man is reinforces certain stereotypes of ruggedness, and we see now how characters like Macduff and Malcolm would add that a man is someone who is in touch with his emotions, who isn't afraid to be sentimental, and being men, they would know. But now let's talk about Macbeth's conception of manliness, and I think his views are really the more interesting. For him, it's not so much the issue of this polemic between emotionlessness and passion, stoic or expressive, but of man versus monster. Now, being a warrior, he certainly acknowledges and practices that idea of Lady Macbeth's, that a man should be brave and never back down. During the banquet scene, when he sees Banquo's ghost sitting in a seat, Lady Macbeth hisses at him, "Are you a man?" Because he's understandably frightened by what he sees, but he's making a scene in front of the guests. He answers her and says, "Yeah, I'm a man, and a bold one too, that can look at this horrible thing sitting in my seat and can keep my wits about me." Then he starts talking to the ghost. And he says, "What man dare, I dare. Approach thou, like the rugged Russian bear, the armed rhinoceros, or the Hyrcan tiger. Take any shape but that," meaning Banquo, "and my firm nerves shall never tremble. Or be alive again, and dare me to the desert with thy sword. If trembling I inhibit then, protest me the baby of a girl." Notice all the animal imagery. Of course, the main point of this speech is to illustrate how brave and how strong he can be when put to the test, but the idea of fighting animals, of being among animals, comes to mind first. It's only after that he lists all the exotic beasts that he adds, "Yeah, and if you were a man, I'd fight you sword to sword, too." We get the idea that at this point of the play, Macbeth relates more to animals, to beasts, than to men. If we go back to the end of Act 1, when Lady Macbeth is still trying to persuade her husband that he needs to kill Duncan, he says this, "Prithee, peace, I dare do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is none." And Lady Macbeth responds, "What beast was it then that made you break this enterprise to me? When you durst do it, then you were a man, and to be more than what you were, you would be so much more the man. Nor time nor place did then adhere, and yet you would make both. They have made themselves, and that their fitness now does unmake you. There's two things here. One, for Macbeth, being a man means doing what's honorable. But more than that, you either do what's honorable or else you aren't a man at all. And he doesn't mean that you become a woman either. Lady Macbeth knows what he means, and she responds, "What beast was it then that made all this information known to me?" By his own estimate, what Macbeth does makes him a monster. To him, being a man means being civilized, honorable, and he gives all this up when he kills Duncan. From that point in the play, both he and the other characters compare him to animals and monsters. When Malcolm returns to Scotland with his English forces and is attacking the castle, Macbeth says, "They have tied me to a stake. I cannot fly, but bear-like I must fight the course." What he's talking about here is an old form of entertainment called bear baiting. Today it seems like a cruel practice, and the folks over at PETA would be tearing their hair out, but it was a popular form of show clear up to the 19th century. Basically, what would happen was that the bear would be tied to a post in the middle of an arena, and then a good number of bulldogs, who would have been trained specifically for this sport, were unleashed upon the bear, and it was basically a matter of seeing if the dogs could kill the bear before the bear killed the dogs. And of course, you could place bets to see who would win. So that's what Macbeth is talking about here. He sees himself as a captured bear, a captured animal with no way of escape. And then, once he encounters Macduff on the battlefield, Macduff says, "Yield thee, coward, and live to be the show and gaze of the time. We'll have thee as our rarer monsters are, painted upon a pole, and under it, here you may see the tyrant." Now he's descended even lower than animals and beasts. He's become a monster. And this is because of his dishonorable actions. He's severed himself from the general tie or bond of humanity, and nothing's left to him now but a primal survival instinct. This idea has always been popular, that man has an animal nature inside of him. If you read Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or read any number of the thousands of books out there now about werewolves, we see this theme of man struggling against this instinct inside of him.